The moment Marcus Hayes glanced down at his watch beneath the glittering chandeliers, a quiet panic tightened in his chest. 8:47. He had stayed too long. Sunlight from hours earlier had given way to the soft glow of evening through the towering glass walls of the Palmer House Hilton, casting reflections across marble floors and designer shoes that clicked confidently past him. Laughter floated easily through the air, effortless and practiced, belonging to people who looked like they had never counted minutes the way he did. Marcus adjusted the frayed cuff of his borrowed jacket and calculated the time again. If he left now, caught the bus on State Street, transferred at Roosevelt, he might still make it home before 9:15. That single thought mattered more than the entire room combined. He took one careful step toward the exit, hoping to disappear unnoticed, when a calm but commanding voice carried across the hall and stopped him cold. The hostess announced that tonight's most unexpected moment would not involve art, jewelry, or luxury experiences, but something far more personal. A recognition. An investment in a man standing right there in the room. In that instant, Marcus's carefully constructed plan to remain invisible shattered, and the entire room slowly turned in his direction. He had never been comfortable in places like this. Rooms filled with polished success had a way of reminding him of everything he was not. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't influential. He wasn't supposed to be standing beneath crystal chandeliers while strangers studied him with curious eyes. Just 3 years earlier, his world had looked very different, simpler in ways that now felt impossibly distant. Life had taught him to move quietly, to work hard without expecting praise, and to carry responsibility without complaint. Tonight was never meant to be about him. He had come only because Patricia Morgan insisted, because she said his presence mattered. But Marcus had learned that attention often came with a price. He felt exposed, his private struggles suddenly hovering on the edge of becoming public knowledge. Embarrassment wrestled with something deeper. Fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being pitied. Fear that everything he had endured in silence was about to be reduced to a spectacle for people who would forget his name by morning. Yet beneath all of it was another feeling he barely recognized anymore. The fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone had truly noticed him. Stories like Marcus's don't begin with applause. They begin with exhaustion. They begin with people doing their best in quiet corners of the world, believing no one is watching. 4 months earlier, Marcus had been on his knees in the flooded basement of the Northside Art Center, water seeping through his work pants, his hands raw from pulling debris. The pipe had burst on a Tuesday afternoon, sending 3 feet of murky water cascading into the space where 200 children stored their artwork, their portfolios, their dreams rendered in crayon and tempera paint. Patricia Morgan had found him there at midnight, long after everyone else had gone home. She stood at the top of the stairs, backlit by the hallway fluorescents, her voice breaking as she surveyed the damage. "We don't have the budget for this. The board meets Thursday. They're going to vote to close us down." Marcus didn't look up from the soggy canvas he was trying to salvage. A child's rendering of a family, stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. The paint had already started to run. "Then we fix it before Thursday." Patricia descended the steps, her sensible heels squelching in the water. She was 55, a black woman who had spent 30 years fighting for arts access in underserved neighborhoods, and Marcus could see the weight of every battle in the set of her shoulders. "Marcus, the estimate came back. $40,000 minimum. We have $8,000 in emergency reserves." He set the ruined painting aside and stood, his knees protesting. At 35, his body already carried the evidence of hard labor, of years spent fixing what others broke or neglected. He wiped his hands on his jeans and met her eyes. "I can do the repairs myself. Structural assessment, new pipes, ventilation restoration. I just need materials and time." "You're a facilities supervisor, not a contractor." "I was 3 months from an engineering degree before I dropped out. I know what I'm doing." Patricia studied him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the war playing out behind her expression. Hope against pragmatism. Trust against liability. If you're wrong, we lose everything. If I don't try, you lose everything anyway. She nodded once, a sharp dip of her chin that sealed an unspoken contract. Marcus started that night. He worked from 7 in the evening until 3 in the morning, then went home to catch 2 hours of sleep before waking his son for school. During the day, he performed his regular duties, keeping the building functional, responding to maintenance requests, pretending everything was normal. At night, he descended into the basement and fought against time, mold, and the structural damage that threatened to condemn the entire building. His neighbor, Mrs. Rosa Blackwell, a 65-year-old widow who lived 2 doors down, watched Theo during those long nights. She never asked questions, just opened her door when Marcus knocked and ruffled the boy's hair. "Go on, baby. Granny Rose has got cookies and cartoons." Theo would look up at his father with those wide, serious eyes that held too much understanding for a 6-year-old. "You're fixing the art place, huh?" "That's right." "Because of Mama?" Marcus's throat would tighten. He'd kneel down, eye level with his son, and straighten the collar of the boy's dinosaur pajamas. Because it matters. Kids need places to create. "Mama used to say that." She did. Theo would nod, accepting this truth the way children accept gravity or seasons, and disappear into Mrs. Blackwell's apartment. Marcus would stand in the hallway for a moment, gathering himself, before heading back to the center. 6 weeks. That's how long it took. 42 days of 3-hour sleep cycles, of calculations scrawled on the backs of supply requisitions, of muscles screaming and hands blistered. Marcus installed new drainage systems, replaced corroded pipes, rebuilt ventilation ducts with a precision that would have impressed his old professors. He worked alone because the center couldn't afford to hire help, and because solitude had become his default state since Sarah died. Sarah. Her name still landed in his chest like a fist. She had been an art teacher at an elementary school on the South Side, the kind of woman who wore paint-stained cardigans and kept her curly hair tied back with whatever was handy, a pencil or a ribbon, or once, memorably, a chopstick. They'd met at a community college 10 years ago, both of them taking night classes, both of them working full-time jobs that barely covered rent. She'd been sketching in the cafeteria between lectures, her charcoal-dusted fingers moving across the page with unconscious grace. "You always draw strangers without asking?" She'd looked up, unrepentant, and turned the sketchpad around. It was him, rendered in quick, confident strokes, his expression far more thoughtful than he felt. "Only the interesting ones." "What makes me interesting?" "You listen to lectures like you're trying to memorize every word, like you're afraid you'll miss something important and never get it back." He'd pulled out the chair across from her without asking permission. "Marcus Hayes." "Sarah Mitchell. And you're right to be worried. Professor Klein doesn't repeat himself." That had been the beginning. Study sessions that stretched past midnight, coffee that turned into dinner, a shared belief that education was a ladder out of the circumstances they'd been born into, and a shared determination to climb it together. When Sarah got pregnant during Marcus's senior year of engineering school, they'd sat in her tiny studio apartment and mapped out their options on a legal pad, 2 columns of numbers that never quite balanced. "I can defer," he'd said. "Work full-time, finish the degree later." "Marcus, you're 3 months from graduating, and you're 3 months from having our baby." Sarah had taken his face in her paint-stained hands and looked at him with that fierce certainty that had always made him feel simultaneously seen and terrified. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But they hadn't figured it out. Not really. Marcus had deferred, then deferred again, and somehow 3 months became 7 years. By the time Theo was born, Marcus was working as a maintenance technician at a hospital, pulling double shifts to cover Sarah's unpaid maternity leave. The engineering degree gathered dust in the back of his mind, a might have been that ached less if he didn't examine it too closely. They'd been happy, though. That was the thing Marcus clung to in the 3 years since her death. They'd been broke and exhausted, and living in a studio apartment where Theo's crib took up half the living space. But they'd been happy. Sarah made pancakes on Saturday mornings, elaborate shapes that Theo would name before devouring. She left notes in Marcus's lunch bag, little sketches and words of encouragement that he'd save in a shoebox under their bed. She'd dance in the kitchen while folding laundry, humming off-key, and Marcus would watch from the doorway and think, "This is enough. This small life. This is everything." Then came the Tuesday that split his existence into before and after. Sarah had been crossing the street with grocery bags in her hands, heading home with supplies for the quilt she was making for Marcus's birthday. A delivery truck ran a red light. There was no warning, no dramatic build-up, just a phone call that arrived while Marcus was unclogging a drain on the hospital's 4th floor. The security guard's voice, carefully neutral, the words that didn't make sense even as Marcus heard them. The drive to Northwestern Memorial that existed in his memory only as fragments. Red lights, the smell of his own sweat, the receptionist's sympathetic eyes. She was already gone by the time he arrived. Massive internal injuries. Death had been instantaneous, they told him, as if that made it better. As if the speed of loss somehow reduced its weight. Grief did not crash into Marcus all at once. It arrived in layers. Shock during the phone call. Numbness during the identification of her body. A strange, detached efficiency during the funeral arrangements, as if he were planning an event for someone else. The real pain came later, in the silence of their apartment, after Theo had cried himself to sleep, in the moments when Marcus would reach for his phone to text Sarah something funny, before remembering she would never read his messages again. The quilt remained unfinished in their bedroom closet. Marcus had opened the door exactly once, 3 days after the funeral, and the sight of Sarah's fabric scraps and careful stitching had sent him to his knees. He'd closed the door and never opened it again. Life did not pause to let Marcus catch his breath. Theo still needed breakfast, clean clothes, someone to check his homework and sign permission slips. Bills still arrived with aggressive regularity. The world continued moving, indifferent to the fact that Marcus's had stopped. He learned quickly that grief, when paired with responsibility, becomes something you carry quietly. Something you portion out in private moments, late at night, or in the shower, anywhere Theo wouldn't see his father break. He learned to braid hair by watching shaky tutorial videos on YouTube at 2 a.m. He learned which lunch foods Theo would actually eat and which ones came back untouched in the superhero lunchbox. He learned to wake before dawn and collapse long after sunset, not because he wanted to, but because survival demanded it. Friends stopped calling after the 3rd declined invitation. Social workers and grief counselors offered their services with kind eyes and pamphlets that Marcus accepted and never read. Rest became a luxury he couldn't afford. Love transformed into endurance, the willingness to keep going even when every part of him was tired. For Marcus, moving to the Northside Arts Center 2 years after Sarah's death had been practical. The job paid $38,000 a year with basic health insurance, and the center offered free after-school programs. Theo could take art classes 3 days a week, working with the same supplies his mother had once used to teach children how to see the world in color and line. It wasn't sentiment, Marcus told himself. It was logistics. But when the basement flooded and Patricia mentioned closing, Marcus had felt something crack open in his chest. This was the place where Theo laughed while mixing paints. This was where his son's drawings hung on bulletin boards, celebrated and safe. This was the last thread connecting the boy to his mother's legacy. And Marcus would work himself to bone dust before letting it snap. So he did. 42 days of 3-hour sleep cycles, 42 nights of returning home to find Theo asleep on Mrs. Blackwell's couch, his small body curled around a throw pillow. 42 mornings of waking with muscles that screamed and hands that could barely grip his coffee mug. On the 43rd day, Patricia stood in the basement with an independent inspector, a white man in his 60s who spent 2 hours examining Marcus's work with a flashlight and a clipboard. The inspector straightened, made a note, and turned to Patricia. "This is better than professional. Your contractor knows his stuff." Patricia's smile was small and private. "He's not a contractor. He's our facilities supervisor." The inspector looked at Marcus with new interest. "You do this kind of work often?" "Not for 7 years." "You should. This is $40,000 worth of repairs, easily. Maybe more." Marcus didn't mention that he'd saved the center $32,000 in labor costs. Didn't mention the unpaid overtime or the personal supplies he'd purchased when requisition forms moved too slowly. He just nodded and started gathering his tools. Patricia waited until the inspector left before approaching him. "The board meets tonight. I'm recommending we reopen next week." "Good." "Marcus," she waited until he looked at her, "you saved this place." "I fixed some pipes." "You worked 360 hours without pay. You redesigned our entire drainage system. You did the work of a team in 6 weeks, alone." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable under her gratitude. "It needed doing." Patricia studied him for a long moment, and Marcus recognized the look. It was the same expression Sarah used to get when she was about to push him out of his comfort zone, gentle but implacable. "There's a gala next month. Major donors, board members, press. I'm nominating you for the Community Hero Award." "No." "Marcus, I don't need an award for doing my job." "This wasn't your job. This was sacrifice. And people need to see that. Especially people with money who think generosity only happens at their income level." Marcus packed his tools methodically, each movement deliberate. He'd learned over the past 3 years that if he kept his hands busy, his emotions couldn't ambush him as easily. "I appreciate the thought, but I don't belong at galas." "Why? Because you're not rich?" "Because those events aren't for people like me. They're for people who write checks and feel good about themselves."
"I'm the help."
"That's fine. That's the job. But I'm not going to stand on a stage and be someone's charity case so they can applaud themselves." Patricia's voice gentled. "That's not what this is. That's always what it is." She let him leave without pressing further, but Marcus knew Patricia Morgan well enough to recognize when a conversation was postponed rather than finished. Sure enough, she approached him again the following week, this time catching him during his lunch break in the maintenance office. "The gala is Saturday, 3 weeks from now. You're on the guest list." Marcus looked up from his sandwich, a peanut butter and jelly creation that Theo had helped assemble that morning with more enthusiasm than precision. "I already said no." "And I'm saying Theo needs to see his father honored." That stopped him. Patricia had fought dirty, and they both knew it. She settled into the chair across from his desk, her expression sympathetic but firm. "That boy watches you work yourself to exhaustion every single day. He sees you sacrifice and struggle and never complain. What he doesn't see is anyone recognizing what that costs you, what it means. He's 6. He doesn't need to see me in a tuxedo. He needs to see that good work matters, that integrity has value, that his father, who gave up sleep and health and peace of mind to save this center, deserves to be celebrated." Marcus set down his sandwich, appetite gone. "I don't have anything to wear." "We'll figure it out. I can't afford to miss a shift. It's Saturday evening. You're off anyway." He tried one more deflection. Mrs. Blackwell might not be available to watch Theo. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed him a text message from Mrs. Blackwell. "Already confirmed I can watch the baby. You go get your trophy, Marcus Hayes." He almost smiled despite himself. "You two planned this. We care about you. Accept it gracefully." So Marcus found himself 3 weeks later standing in his apartment bathroom trying to knot a borrowed tie with hands that had forgotten how to perform such delicate work. The suit came from a neighbor down the hall, a man roughly Marcus's size who worked in insurance and kept formal wear for client meetings. The shoes were Marcus's own. Dress shoes he'd last worn to Sarah's funeral, polished to a shine that couldn't quite hide their age. Theo sat on the closed toilet lid, watching with solemn attention. "You look fancy, Daddy." "I look uncomfortable." "Mrs. Rosa says fancy people are always uncomfortable. That's how you know they're fancy." Marcus finally got the tie into something resembling a proper knot and turned to face his son. Theo had inherited Sarah's eyes, deep brown and unnervingly perceptive, and her habit of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something. "You gonna be good for Mrs. Blackwell?" "I'm always good." "You're always energetic. Sometimes that's different." Theo grinned, gap-toothed and unrepentant. "She likes my energy. She says I keep her young." Marcus knelt down, bringing himself eye level with the boy. "I'll be home by 9. Maybe earlier if I can slip out." "Patricia says you're getting an award." "A small one. Not a big deal." Mama used to say people who do important things always think they're not a big deal. The grief hit sideways, sudden and sharp. Marcus breathed through it, waiting for the wave to pass before trusting his voice. "Your mama was smart." "I know." Theo reached out and straightened Marcus's tie with small, careful fingers. "She'd want you to go. She'd want people to say thank you." Marcus pulled his son into a hug, holding tight enough to feel the boy's heartbeat against his chest. When he finally released him, Theo was studying him with that too-old expression again. "Daddy, are you sad?" "Sometimes. But I'm also proud of you, and grateful, and a lot of other things all mixed up together." Theo considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Like when you make smoothies and forget to put the lid on right." Marcus laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Yeah, buddy, exactly like that." Mrs. Blackwell arrived at 7:15, a vision in a purple tracksuit and orthopedic sneakers, carrying a canvas bag full of cookies and craft supplies. "Look at you, all cleaned up. Lord have mercy." "Mrs. Blackwell, none of that. You go accept your flowers like the good man you are. Theo and I have big plans involving glitter and possibly structural engineering with cardboard boxes." Marcus looked at his son, who was already eyeing the craft supplies with predatory interest. "Please don't destroy the apartment." "No promises," Mrs. Blackwell said cheerfully. "Now go, before you're late and Patricia sends a search party." The bus ride to the Palmer house took 45 minutes, and Marcus spent the entire journey watching Chicago roll past the window, the familiar streets transformed by evening light into something almost beautiful. He'd lived in this city his entire life, born in the South Side Hospital, raised in a series of apartments that grew marginally better as his mother worked her way from housekeeping to administrative assistant. She died of breast cancer when Marcus was 22, 2 years before he met Sarah. And sometimes he wondered what she would think of the life he'd built. Would she be proud? Disappointed that he'd never finished his degree? He'd never know. The Palmer House Hilton rose like a cathedral of old money and new wealth, its lobby a study in marble columns and gilded ceilings that made Marcus feel instantly out of place. He followed signs to the grand ballroom, joining a stream of people in designer clothing and confident postures. A woman in a black evening gown glanced at his borrowed suit and smiled politely, the kind of smile that acknowledged his presence without really seeing him. Patricia found him lurking near the entrance, trying to decide if he could reasonably claim a sudden illness. "There you are. I was getting worried." "Traffic." She didn't call him on the lie, just linked her arm through his and steered him into the ballroom. The space was overwhelming, all crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows, round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. People milled about with champagne flutes, their laughter floating up toward the ornate ceiling like expensive bubbles. "I don't belong here." Patricia squeezed his arm. "You belong here more than most of these people. You actually did something worth celebrating." She deposited him at a table near the back, introduced him to a handful of board members whose names immediately evaporated from Marcus's memory, and disappeared to handle hostess duty. Marcus sat, hyper-aware of his borrowed suit and discount shoes, and watched the room fill with people who navigated wealth like it was their native language. At the front table, he spotted Richard Pemberton, the board treasurer, a white man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from resort vacations. Pemberton was laughing at something a donor said, his hand on the other man's shoulder, performing ease and intimacy. Marcus had met him exactly once, during the board inspection of the flood repairs. Pemberton had walked through the basement, made approving noises, and left without speaking to Marcus directly. Patricia had mentioned later that Pemberton had been the loudest voice arguing for closure, convinced the repair costs would bankrupt the center. Marcus checked his watch. 7:53. If he stayed through the awards presentation, he could leave by 8:30, be home by 9:15. Theo would probably still be awake, wired on Mrs. Blackwell's cookies and whatever craft chaos they'd created. The lights dimmed. A woman took the stage, the executive director of the Arts Council that provided partial funding to centers like Northside. She spoke about the importance of community investment, about creativity as a path to opportunity, about the transformative power of access. Marcus let the words wash over him. Familiar rhetoric that sounded good in ballrooms, but rarely translated to actual resources. Then Patricia took the microphone, and something in the room's energy shifted. "Tonight, I want to talk about a different kind of investment. Not the kind that comes with tax deductions or naming rights, the kind that happens in the dark, when no one's watching, when the only reward is knowing you did what needed doing." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Patricia's eyes found him across the room. 4 months ago, the Northside Art Center faced catastrophic damage. A burst pipe flooded our basement, destroying artwork, supplies, equipment. The repair estimate came in at $40,000. Our emergency fund held $8,000. Every contractor we contacted said the work would take months and cost more than we could ever afford. The room had gone quiet, champagne flutes lowered, attention focused. One man said, "I can fix it." One man worked 360 hours over 6 weeks, refusing overtime pay because he knew we couldn't afford it. One man with an incomplete engineering degree and a complete sense of responsibility rebuilt our center's infrastructure with a precision that amazed professional inspectors. Marcus wanted to disappear, to melt into his chair and evaporate. Heat crawled up his neck. That man is here tonight. Marcus Hayes, our facility supervisor, father of a 6-year-old son, widower who still shows up every morning to maintain a place of beauty and possibility for children who remind him of everything he's lost and everything worth fighting for. The spotlight found him. Marcus froze, trapped in the white circle of light like a specimen under glass. Around him, people turned to look, their expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy, to something that might have been respect. Patricia wasn't finished. Awards are usually about what people accomplish with resources. Tonight, I want to recognize what Marcus accomplished without them. Hard work, sacrifice, integrity. These aren't just words on a plaque. They're 360 hours of choosing community over comfort. Their calloused hands and exhausted eyes and the unshakable belief that some things matter more than money. She paused, and in that pause, Marcus heard his own heartbeat, loud and irregular. "So I'm not giving Marcus an award tonight. Someone else wants to do something different." Patricia stepped aside, and another woman took the stage. Marcus recognized her immediately, though they'd never been formally introduced. Diana Foster, tech CEO, major donor, the kind of person whose net worth got reported in business journals. She was 42, white, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, and a black dress that probably cost more than Marcus's car. She'd visited the center twice in the past year, quiet tours during which she'd observed classes and asked thoughtful questions. Diana surveyed the room with calm authority, then spoke directly into the microphone, her voice carrying without strain. I have insomnia. Bad insomnia. Most nights I'm awake at 2 a.m, driving around the city, trying to outrun my own thoughts. This was not the speech people expected. Marcus saw confusion ripple through the audience. 4 months ago, I found myself outside the Northside Arts Center at 2:15 in the morning. I saw lights in the basement. I went to investigate, thinking maybe there was a break-in, something I should report. Diana's eyes found Marcus across the room, held him in place. What I found was a man in soaking wet work clothes on his hands and knees in 3 feet of water, trying to salvage children's artwork. He didn't know I was watching. He just worked, methodical and careful, treating each ruined painting like it mattered, like it was precious. Marcus remembered that night, the cold water, the ruined canvases, the exhaustion that had settled into his bones like sediment. He hadn't known anyone was watching. I came back the next night, and the night after that. I watched this man rebuild an entire building's infrastructure with a precision that would have impressed professional engineers. I watched him check every corner, every surface, testing for safety hazards that might hurt the children who would return when the center reopened. And I realized I was watching someone who understood that real work happens in the dark. Real sacrifice happens without witnesses. Diana paused, and Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing against him. Until now. She smiled, small and genuine. Tonight, I'm not bidding on art or experiences or luxury packages. I'm investing in something rarer. I'm investing in proof that integrity still exists, that sacrifice still matters, that one person can make a difference by simply refusing to walk away when things get hard. The room had gone completely still. So here's my bid, and it's final. $50,000. Not for artwork, not for a vacation package, for Marcus Hayes. For education, for childcare, for stability, for breathing room, for the chance to stop surviving and start building. The silence that followed was absolute, a held breath that stretched across seconds. Then someone started clapping. Someone else joined. Within moments, the entire ballroom was on its feet, applause rolling like thunder against the gilded ceiling. Marcus sat frozen, the spotlight still pinning him in place, his mind unable to process what had just happened. $50,000. His annual salary plus $12,000. More money than he'd ever had at one time. More money than he'd ever imagined having. And everyone was looking at him. The applause continued, wave after wave crashing against Marcus's consciousness while he remained locked in his chair, unable to move. Diana stepped down from the stage and walked toward him, the crowd parting naturally to let her pass. She extended her hand, not in congratulation, but in invitation, and Marcus found himself standing without conscious decision, his borrowed suit suddenly feeling like a costume in a play he hadn't auditioned for. Her grip was firm, businesslike, the kind of handshake that communicated competence rather than warmth. Monday morning, 10 o'clock. My office is on the 42nd floor of the Aeon Center. She pressed a business card into his palm, the cardstock heavy and expensive, then released him and moved back into the crowd. The applause finally died down, replaced by the hum of conversation as people returned to their champagne and networking. Marcus stood alone in the spotlight's afterglow, the card burning in his hand like evidence of something he couldn't yet name. Patricia appeared at his elbow, her eyes bright with tears she was too professional to shed in public. You okay? Marcus's voice came out rougher than intended. I need to leave. She understood immediately, steering him toward a side exit with practiced efficiency. They emerged into a service hallway, fluorescent lights harsh after the ballroom's golden glow. Marcus leaned against the wall, his breathing shallow and rapid. That was ambush. That was recognition. That was humiliation. Everyone in that room now knows I'm broke, struggling, desperate enough to need charity from a CEO who watches me work in the middle of the night like I'm some kind of performance art. Patricia's expression hardened, the sympathetic social worker replaced by the woman who'd spent 3 decades fighting for resources in a world that treated arts funding like an optional luxury. Is that really what you think just happened? That Diana Foster, a woman worth $200 million, stood in front of Chicago's wealthiest donors and degraded you? She told them I'm a charity case. She told them you're extraordinary. There's a difference. Marcus pushed off the wall, needing movement, needing distance from the weight of expectation pressing down on his shoulders. I have to get home. Theo's waiting. Patricia let him go, but her voice followed him down the hallway. Monday morning, Marcus. Don't run from this. The bus ride home stretched longer than the journey there, every stop a small eternity. Marcus stared at his reflection in the dark window, seeing a man in a borrowed suit holding a business card that promised to change everything or ruin everything. And he couldn't decide which prospect terrified him more. The card listed Diana's direct office line, her email, the kind of access that spoke to power and influence he'd never possessed. He arrived home at 9:35, late enough that guilt sat heavy in his chest as he unlocked the apartment door. Mrs. Blackwell was on the couch, crocheting something purple and ambitious, while Theo slept curled in the armchair with glitter still sparkling in his hair. How'd it go? Marcus set his keys in the bowl by the door, a ceramic piece Theo had made in art class, lopsided and perfect. It was fine. Mrs. Blackwell's hands stilled, her eyes sharp despite her age. That's the tone men use when things are decidedly not fine. A woman I've never met just gave me $50,000 in front of 300 people. The crochet hook clattered to the floor. Mrs. Blackwell stared at him, mouth opening and closing twice before words emerged. I'm sorry, what? Diana Foster, tech CEO. She bid $50,000 for me like I was an auction item, said it was investment in my future, and now everyone knows I'm the poor maintenance man who needs rescuing. Mrs. Blackwell retrieved her crochet hook with deliberate slowness, her movements giving her time to process. And you feel... how about this? Humiliated, exposed, angry that someone made my private struggle public without asking permission. Anything else? Marcus sank into the other armchair, careful not to disturb Theo's sleep. Terrified, because part of me wants to take it. Part of me is already calculating what $50,000 could mean. And that makes me feel weak. Mrs. Blackwell resumed her crocheting, the rhythm soothing despite the conversation's tension. Marcus, I've known you 3 years now. Watched you raise that boy alone, work yourself half to death, refuse every offer of help like accepting kindness would somehow diminish you. You know what I see? A stubborn fool. A man so busy being strong that he's forgotten strength comes in different forms. Sometimes strength is carrying everything yourself. Sometimes it's letting someone else hold the weight for a minute while you catch your breath. She stood, gathering her supplies, pausing to rest a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Sleep on it. Things look different in daylight. After she left, Marcus carried Theo to bed, the boy stirring just enough to mumble something about robots before burrowing under his blanket. Marcus sat on the edge of the mattress, watching his son sleep, studying the face that held echoes of Sarah in every feature. The quilt she'd been making remained in the closet, untouched, a ghost of intentions interrupted by death. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at their tiny kitchen table, Diana's business card propped against his coffee mug, and watched the city lights blink through their window. $50,000. He could pay off the credit card debt that had accumulated like sediment over 3 years of medical bills and emergency expenses. Could move to a 2-bedroom apartment where Theo had actual space instead of a curtained corner. Could finish his engineering degree, the phantom limb of his abandoned ambitions. Or he could refuse it, maintain his dignity, prove he didn't need saving. By the time sunrise painted the sky pink and gold, Marcus had decided nothing except that he would keep the Monday appointment. Information wasn't commitment. Listening wasn't agreement. Theo woke at 6:30, his internal clock precise despite the weekend, and found Marcus still at the table. "Did you sleep in your fancy clothes?" Marcus looked down at his wrinkled suit pants, his loosened tie. "Guess so." "That's silly." "Yeah, it is." Theo climbed into his lap, small and warm and smelling of sleep and glitter. "Did you get your trophy?" "Something like that." "Can I see it?" Marcus held up the business card. Theo squinted at the embossed lettering, his reading skills still developing. "That's a funny trophy." "It's not really a trophy, buddy. It's more like a promise." "Of what?" "Good question." Marcus kissed the top of his son's head, breathing in the sweetness of childhood innocence. "I'm still figuring that out." The weekend passed in a blur of routine. Laundry and grocery shopping and a trip to the park where Theo played on equipment that had seen better decades, while Marcus pushed him on swings and pretended everything was normal. But Sunday night arrived with the inevitability of tide, and Marcus stood in front of his closet staring at clothes that suddenly seemed inadequate for meeting a woman worth $200 million. He settled on his best khakis and a button-down shirt Sarah had bought him 4 Christmases ago, back when they'd had money for gifts beyond socks and practical necessities. The shirt still fit, barely, his shoulders slightly broader from manual labor than they'd been when she wrapped it in discount paper covered in snowmen. Monday morning brought rain, the kind of cold October drizzle that turned Chicago gray and inhospitable. Marcus dropped Theo at school, watching him run toward the building with his backpack bouncing, then caught the red line downtown. The Aeon Center rose like a glass monument to corporate achievement. 83 floors of modern architecture that made Marcus feel small before he'd even entered the lobby. Security directed him to the elevator bank, and he rode to the 42nd floor in silence, alongside men and women in expensive suits who stared at their phones with the intensity of people whose time was worth triple digits per hour. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed minimalism was a personality. "Marcus Hayes, I have an appointment with Diana Foster." The receptionist, a young white woman with severe glasses and perfect posture, typed something into her computer. "She's expecting you. Conference room B, down the hall to your left." The conference room overlooked Michigan Avenue, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Lake Michigan stretching gray and infinite toward a horizon lost in rain. Diana stood with her back to the door, hands clasped behind her, studying the water. "Thank you for coming." Marcus closed the door, feeling trapped despite the room's generous dimensions. "You didn't really give me a choice." She turned, and he saw her properly for the first time without stage lights and formal distance. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that expensive makeup couldn't quite conceal. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, despite what was probably a rigorous skincare routine, and her hair, pulled back in the same efficient knot as Saturday night, showed threads of gray she hadn't bothered to color. "You always have a choice. That's what this meeting is about." She gestured to the chairs arranged around a conference table that could have seated 12. They sat across from each other, a distance that felt simultaneously too close and too far. Diana slid a folder across the table's polished surface. "This is the proposal. $50,000 structured as a trust with specific allocations. $20,000 for educational expenses designated for completion of your engineering degree or equivalent certification. $18,000 for reliable childcare over a 2-year period, allowing you consistent work hours without the anxiety of coverage gaps. $12,000 for housing stability and immediate debt relief. Marcus opened the folder, scanning documents that used language like beneficiary and disbursement schedule, words that belonged to people with financial advisors and tax attorneys. This isn't charity. This is investment in someone who creates measurable impact. He looked up from the papers, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. You don't know me. You watched me work in a flooded basement. That doesn't give you insight into my character or my future potential. Diana leaned back, her posture shifting from corporate professional to something more human. 15 years ago, I was a single mother with a 5-year-old daughter. I worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and still couldn't afford childcare that didn't terrify me. I was one emergency away from complete collapse, and I knew it. Every single day, I knew it. This confession landed between them like something fragile and dangerous. A social worker named Franklin Williams noticed. He worked at the community center where I brought Emily for free after-school programs. He watched me arrive exhausted, watched me leave defeated, and one day he stopped me in the parking lot. Diana's hands moved to the table's edge, gripping it like she needed physical anchor. He told me there was a coding boot camp starting in 6 weeks. 12-week intensive program that could lead to entry-level tech positions. Cost? $30,000. I laughed in his face. I had $1,700 in my checking account and rent due in a week. She released the table, folding her hands in her lap with visible effort. Franklin said he'd cover it. Not a loan, a gift. He said someone had invested in him once, and this was how he paid it forward. I refused for 3 days. Then Emily got sick, missed school. I missed 2 shifts, lost one of my jobs, and I realized pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition he didn't want to acknowledge. I took the boot camp, got hired at a startup, worked my way up, sold my first company for $40 million 8 years later, built the second one to $200 million. And Franklin Williams died of a heart attack 6 months before the first sale went through. I never got to thank him properly. The rain intensified against the windows, drumming a rhythm that filled the silence. So no, Marcus, I don't know you, but I recognize you. I recognize what it looks like when someone is one disaster away from losing everything they've fought to build. And I refuse to watch someone drown when I have a life raft. Marcus stared at the folder, at the neat columns of numbers that could reshape his entire existence, and felt anger rise like bile. You don't get to use me to work out your guilt over a dead man's generosity. Diana flinched, the first crack in her composed exterior. That's fair. But it doesn't make the money less real or the opportunity less legitimate. It makes me a symbol, a project. The grateful poor person who validates your narrative about paying it forward. Is that really what you think? Marcus stood, unable to remain seated while his emotions churned. I think you're a stranger who watched me during the worst moment of my professional life and decided you knew what I needed better than I do. I think you humiliated me in front of 300 people because it made a good story. And I think if Franklin Williams was here, he'd tell you that real respect means asking before deciding someone else's fate. He walked to the windows, putting distance between himself and the temptation represented by that folder. Diana's voice came quiet behind him. You're right. He turned, surprised. I should have approached you privately first. Should have explained my intentions before making a public gesture. I was operating from my own assumptions about what would be meaningful, and I didn't consider how exposure might feel like violation. Her admission diffused some of his anger, leaving behind something more complicated. So what now? Now you decide. The offer stands, regardless of whether you're angry with me. The money is real. The structure is designed to provide support without creating dependency. You can accept it, refuse it, or take time to consider. But understand this. Diana stood, crossing to stand beside him at the window, both of them looking out at the rain-soaked city. This isn't about my guilt. It's about Franklin's belief that one person with resources and one person with determination can create change together. He didn't save me. He stood beside me while I saved myself. That's all I'm offering you. Marcus looked at her reflection in the glass, seeing not the polished CEO, but a woman who'd once been exactly where he was now, desperate and proud and terrified. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. The money isn't going anywhere. He left the Aeon Center with the folder tucked under his jacket to protect it from rain, and rode the red line back toward a life that suddenly felt both unbearable and precious. The apartment was empty, Theo still at school, and Marcus sat at the kitchen table surrounded by evidence of their life. Bills stacked in careful priority order. Theo's artwork covering the refrigerator. A photo of Sarah on the bookshelf, her smile permanent and unreachable. He opened the folder and read every word, studying the legal language that promised stability without strings. The trust would be administered by a third party, disbursements triggered by verified expenses, education, childcare, housing, the essentials that would allow him to stop treading water and actually swim towards something better. His phone rang. Patricia's name lit the screen. I heard you met with Diana this morning. News travels fast. It's a small community. How are you feeling? Marcus rubbed his eyes, exhaustion finally catching up after his sleepless weekend. Overwhelmed, angry, tempted, all of it at once. That sounds about right. Listen, the board is meeting Thursday night. We need to discuss how this impacts your role at the center. Something cold settled in Marcus's stomach. What do you mean? Patricia's hesitation spoke volumes. Richard Pemberton has concerns about conflict of interest, about the optics of a donor providing significant financial support to an employee. So he wants me fired. He wants boundaries clarified. I'm fighting him on this, but you should know there's opposition. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the walls closing in from all sides. What kind of boundaries? He's proposing you step back from any public-facing responsibilities. No speaking at events, no donor tours, no media presence. Basically, back to invisible maintenance work. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Diana's attempt to make him visible had triggered efforts to render him invisible again. I need to go. Theo gets out of school in 20 minutes. He hung up and sat in silence until his alarm reminded him to move. The walk to Theo's elementary school took 15 minutes, and Marcus used every second to build the mask he wore around his son. The one that said everything was fine. Daddy had it handled. No need to worry about adult problems. Theo emerged from the building with his usual explosion of energy, backpack trailing papers and enthusiasm. We learned about butterflies. They start as caterpillars, and then they turn into beautiful flying things, and Miss Johnson said it's called metamorphosis, which is a really big word, but I can say it. Metamorphosis. Marcus hoisted the boy onto his shoulders, letting Theo's joy wash over him like absolution. That is a big word. You're getting smart. I'm already smart. Now I'm getting smarter. They walked home through streets Marcus had navigated for 3 years, passing the bodega where he bought groceries, the laundromat where he washed their clothes every Sunday, the park where Sarah used to push Theo on swings before the world broke. Everything familiar, everything suddenly precarious. That evening, after dinner and homework and the elaborate bedtime routine that Theo had developed through some combination of negotiation and manipulation, Marcus sat on the couch with his phone and Diana's business card. He drafted 3 different text messages, deleted them all, and finally settled on simplicity. I have questions. Her response came within minutes. I have time. Tomorrow? Same place or somewhere less formal if you'd prefer. Coffee shop. Neutral ground. She sent an address in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood Marcus rarely visited because it represented a tax bracket beyond his reach. But the next morning, Tuesday, he arranged for Mrs. Blackwell to pick Theo up from school and took the bus north. The coffee shop was the kind of place that served lattes in ceramic mugs and displayed pastries like they were museum pieces. Diana sat in a corner booth, dressed in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, but looked defiantly casual. She waved when she saw him, and he noticed she'd already ordered him a coffee, black, steam rising in gentle spirals. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" "I didn't. I guessed. If I'm wrong, order something else." He slid into the booth across from her, wrapping his hands around the mug for warmth and purpose. "Why me?" "Specifically, you could fund a dozen programs that would help hundreds of people. Why invest $50,000 in one maintenance worker?" Diana added cream to her own coffee, the question clearly expected. "Because systems change when individuals do. I've funded programs, scholarships, grants, infrastructure improvements. They help, and I'll keep doing them. But I've learned something about how real transformation happens." She paused, collecting her thoughts with visible care. "It happens when one person gets the breathing room to become their full potential, and then uses that potential to change the environment around them. Franklin didn't just fund my coding bootcamp. He funded my ability to eventually hire people, mentor others, build systems that create opportunity. One person, properly supported, radiates impact." Marcus sipped his coffee, buying time to process. "You're betting on me becoming you. Rich, successful, someone who pays it forward at galas. I'm betting on you becoming the fullest version of yourself, whatever that looks like. Maybe you finish your engineering degree and design sustainable infrastructure for underfunded communities. Maybe you stay at the Arts Center and rebuild it from the inside out. Maybe you do something I can't even imagine. The point isn't to replicate my path. It's to clear yours." He set down his mug, meeting her eyes directly. "Patricia called yesterday. The board treasurer wants me removed from any public role because of this. Your generosity is getting me demoted." Diana's expression hardened into something sharp and corporate. "Richard Pemberton. You know him?" "I know his type. Men who believe generosity should only flow downward through official channels they control. Men who see direct support as threatening because it bypasses their gatekeeping." She pulled out her phone, typed rapidly, then showed Marcus the screen. An email sent to the entire Northside Arts Center board. "Effective immediately, I'm resigning my board position. My financial support to Marcus Hayes is personal, not institutional, and eliminates any conflict of interest. Additionally, I'm donating $500,000 to the center's general operating fund, no strings attached. Richard can have the power he craves. I'll keep the impact." Marcus stared at the email, at the casual way she'd just sacrificed her board seat and donated $500,000 to protect him from political maneuvering. You can't just quit a board because one treasurer is being difficult. "Watch me. I've learned that positions matter less than action. Franklin taught me that, too." Something cracked in Marcus's chest, the defensive wall he'd built against her generosity showing its first real fissure. "I don't know how to accept this without feeling weak." Diana's expression softened, the CEO mask falling away to reveal something more vulnerable. "Then let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Accepting help doesn't make you weak. Pretending you don't need it when you're drowning makes you dishonest. And dishonesty is far worse than vulnerability." Easy for you to say from your side of $200 million. You think having money makes vulnerability easier? I've been divorced twice. My daughter barely speaks to me because I was too busy building companies to build a relationship. I have insomnia so severe I drive around at 2 a.m. watching strangers work in flooded basements because I've forgotten how to connect with actual human beings. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. I'm offering you money because that's what I have to give. But what I really need? What I'm actually hoping for is to remember what it feels like to invest in something real, something that matters more than quarterly earnings and market share. Marcus felt his resistance shifting, not disappearing, but transforming into something more complex. If I accept this, it changes everything. Yes, that's the point. What if I fail? What if I take the money and nothing changes? Then you fail with slightly more resources than you had before. But Marcus, I've seen how you work. I've watched you treat children's artwork like it was precious. I've seen your precision, your care, your refusal to cut corners even when no one's watching. People like you don't fail. You just take longer to succeed because you're doing it right. He thought about Theo, about the 2-bedroom apartment where his son could have his own space, about finishing the degree that haunted him like a ghost of alternate timelines, about not having to choose between groceries and medications, between new shoes for a growing boy and electricity bills. I need one promise from you. Diana waited, attentive. If I take this, you don't own me. You don't get to dictate my choices or expect gratitude performances or use me as a prop in your redemption narrative. This is support, not control. Agreed. With one condition of my own. Marcus tensed. You let me get to know Theo, not as an obligation or because the money requires it, but because I miss having a kid in my life who still thinks adults are capable of magic. My daughter's 20, studying abroad, building a life that doesn't include me. I'd like to remember what it was like when she needed me. The request was so unexpected, so quietly desperate, that Marcus found himself nodding before conscious thought caught up. He'd probably like that. He asks about you, wants to know if the fancy lady who gave Daddy money is magic. Diana's smile was small and genuine. Tell him I'm just someone who had magic worked on her once, and I'm trying to pass it along. They talked for another hour, working through logistics and boundaries, establishing a relationship that was neither charity nor friendship, but something undefined and necessary. By the time Marcus left the coffee shop, the rain had cleared, and October sunlight painted Lincoln Park in shades of gold that made the changing leaves look like currency. He picked Theo up from Mrs. Blackwell's apartment, endured the boy's detailed account of after-school adventures, and made dinner while Theo did homework at the kitchen table. It was deeply ordinary, the kind of evening he'd lived hundreds of times before, but something had shifted in the foundation of their lives, a tectonic movement that hadn't yet shown its full effects. After Theo was asleep, Marcus called Patricia. I'm accepting Diana's offer, and I need you to know I won't step back from my work. If Pemberton wants me invisible, he can vote to fire me, but I won't volunteer for erasure. Patricia's relief was audible through the phone. Good. The board meets Thursday. I'll make sure your position is clear. Thursday arrived with the inevitability of judgment. Marcus worked his regular shift, fixing a temperamental furnace and replacing burned-out bulbs in the second-floor studios, moving through his duties with the same precision he always had. At 6 o'clock, he showered in the staff bathroom, changed into clean clothes, and walked into the board meeting like he had every right to be there. The conference room fell silent when he entered. 8 board members sat around the table, Patricia at the head, Pemberton to her right. The man was exactly as Marcus remembered, silver-haired and expensively dressed, his expression hovering between surprise and irritation. This is a closed session. Marcus remained standing, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. According to the center's bylaws, financial decisions affecting employees must be discussed in open session. I checked with legal aid. Patricia's smile was small and proud. Marcus is correct. This discussion involves his employment status. He has the right to be present. Pemberton's jaw tightened, but he gestured to an empty chair. Fine. Sit. Marcus sat, folding his hands on the table's surface, waiting. Pemberton opened a folder, pulling out printed documents. The issue before us is simple. An employee has received significant financial support from a major donor. This creates optics problems and potential conflicts of interest that could damage the center's reputation. One of the other board members, a black woman in her 60s named Grace Williams, spoke up. What specific conflict are you concerned about? That Marcus might feel obligated to Diana Foster, that his work might be influenced by her generosity, that other donors might question whether their contributions are being appropriately managed if we allow personal financial entanglements between staff and benefactors. Marcus had spent 2 days preparing for this moment, writing and rewriting his response until it was stripped to essential truth. May I speak? Patricia nodded. For 3 years, I've worked at this center without asking for special treatment or recognition. I've done my job, raised my son, and survived. When the flood happened, I didn't volunteer for glory. I volunteered because this place matters to families who can't afford private art lessons and expensive programs. Because my son learns here. Because my late wife believed spaces like this change lives. He paused, making eye contact with each board member. Diana Foster didn't approach me. I didn't ask her for money. She made a choice based on work she witnessed. Her gift is personal, not institutional, and she's resigned her board seat to eliminate any conflict. The only conflict I see is between my dignity and your comfort with maintaining boundaries that keep people like me in our assigned places. The room went very quiet. You're asking me to step back from public roles because my poverty became visible. Because someone decided a working-class black man deserved support, and that makes you uncomfortable. But here's what I've learned in 3 years of surviving impossible odds. Marcus stood, his voice gaining strength. Charity asks what you lack. Investment asks what you're capable of. Diana invested in capability. You're trying to enforce lack. And I refuse to accept that framework. Grace Williams started clapping, slow and deliberate. Another board member joined. Within seconds, 5 of the 8 were applauding, leaving Pemberton isolated at Patricia's right hand. Motion to censure Marcus Hayes. How do you vote? Opposed, Grace said immediately. One by one the votes came. Opposed, opposed, opposed. Only Pemberton voted in favor. Patricia's smile was triumphant. Motion fails 1-7. This board recognizes Marcus Hayes' continued valuable service and supports his professional growth. Meeting adjourned. Pemberton gathered his papers in tight-lipped silence and left without acknowledging anyone. The other board members approached Marcus, offering quiet congratulations and solidarity. Grace shook his hand with fierce grip. My husband was Franklin Williams, Diana's mentor. He'd be proud of you, young man. Standing up like that takes courage most people don't have. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Franklin Williams, the social worker who'd invested in Diana 15 years ago. This woman's husband. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be sorry. Be purposeful. Franklin believed one life, properly supported, could change hundreds more. You just proved him right. After the board meeting, Marcus walked home through streets that felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged had lifted. The apartment was dark when he arrived, Theo asleep at Mrs. Blackwell's again, and Marcus stood in the silence thinking about everything that had changed in 4 days. His phone buzzed. Diana. Patricia told me how the meeting went. Congratulations. Thank you. For resigning, for the donation, for all of it. You're welcome. Now comes the hard part. What's that? Letting yourself imagine a future that isn't just survival. That's where real transformation begins. Marcus looked around the apartment, at the bills on the counter and the photos on the bookshelf, and the life he'd built from grief and determination. Diana was right. The hardest part wasn't accepting help. It was believing he deserved what came next. The following Monday, Marcus walked into the registrar's office at Harold Washington College with paperwork that felt like a passport to a country he'd left behind 7 years ago. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged Latina with reading glasses on a beaded chain, reviewed his transcript without comment, her finger tracing the line where his academic career had simply stopped mid-semester. You were 3 months from completion. Life happened. She looked up, her expression shifting from bureaucratic neutrality to something closer to understanding. Civil engineering technology. Good program. Professor Linda Gray still teaches the capstone course. You'll need her signature to resume. Marcus took the form she slid across the counter, his hand shaking slightly as he folded it into his jacket pocket. The trust had disbursed its first payment the previous week, $20,000 transferred into an education account he could access only for tuition, books, and approved supplies. The money was real, the opportunity was real, and the terror of failing again was absolutely real. Professor Gray's office was exactly as he remembered it. Every horizontal surface covered in blueprints and structural models, the organized chaos of someone who thought in 3 dimensions. She looked up when he knocked, her face creasing into genuine surprise behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Marcus Hayes, I wondered if you'd ever come back. You remember me? I remember every student who drops out 3 weeks before finishing, especially the brilliant ones. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, moving a stack of exams to make space. Marcus sat, the form heavy in his pocket. I need your signature to re-enroll. Complete my certification. Linda removed her glasses, studying him with the intensity that had made her legendary among engineering students. Why now? Why after 7 years? Because I can afford to now. Because my son needs to see his father finish what he started. Those are good reasons. But they're not your reason. Marcus looked at his hands, calloused from 7 years of manual labor, capable hands that had rebuilt an entire art center's infrastructure. Because I've spent 7 years fixing other people's mistakes. I want to learn how to build things right from the beginning. Linda smiled, a fierce expression of vindication. That's the right answer. You're in. Class starts next Tuesday, 6 to 9 p.m. Don't be late. She signed the form with a flourish, then pulled out a syllabus from her filing cabinet. Fair warning, the curriculum changed since you were last here. New software, updated building codes, different materials science. You're going to struggle. I've been struggling for 7 years. At least this struggle has an end point. Good, because I don't give extensions and I don't accept excuses. You're going to earn this, just like everyone else. Marcus left her office with the signed form and a syllabus that detailed 15 weeks of intensive coursework. He'd be in class Tuesday and Thursday evenings, studying on weekends, completing projects that would require skills he hadn't used since Theo was born. The challenge felt enormous and necessary in equal measure. The second change arrived through an email from Brightside after-school programs, confirming Theo's enrollment starting the following week. $600 per month, paid directly from the trust for 5 days of supervised care that included homework help, structured play, and art activities. Marcus read the confirmation 3 times, still unable to believe that the anxiety he'd carried for 3 years, the constant calculation of pickups and coverage and what happened if he was late, would simply evaporate. He showed the email to Theo that evening over dinner, watching his son's face light up with the uncomplicated joy of childhood. Will they have Legos? Max from school goes there, and he says they have a whole room just for building. The website mentions a makerspace. What's a makerspace? A place where you can make things, build things, create things. Theo considered this, twirling spaghetti onto his fork with the concentration he applied to all fine motor tasks. Like Mama used to teach? The question landed with its usual sharp edge, grief condensed into 5 words. Yeah, buddy, like that. Then I want to go. The following Tuesday, Marcus dropped Theo at Brightside's downtown location, a converted warehouse that hummed with the controlled chaos of 40 children engaged in purposeful activity. A young black woman with natural hair and paint-stained jeans introduced herself as Miss Jennifer, the lead instructor. Theo's going to love it here. We've got a whole unit planned on recycled art, turning trash into treasure. Theo was already eyeing the craft supplies with predatory interest. His earlier nervousness evaporated in the face of glitter and possibility. You sure he'll be okay? Miss Jennifer's smile was knowing. Dad, we've got this. You've got somewhere to be? Marcus checked his watch. 5:40. Class started at 6, and he needed to cross downtown in rush hour traffic. Yeah, I do. He kissed Theo's forehead and left before his son could protest, jogging to the Red Line with a backpack full of notebooks and mechanical pencils. He made it to Harold Washington College with 3 minutes to spare, sliding into a seat in the back row of a classroom filled with students who looked impossibly young. Fresh-faced 20-year-olds who'd never had to choose between education and survival. Professor Gray entered exactly at 6, dropping her leather satchel on the desk with a thud that commanded immediate silence. Civil Engineering Technology, capstone course. We're going to design, model, and present a complete infrastructure project. You'll work in teams of 3, and your final presentation will be judged by working engineers from the city planning department. Questions? A hand went up. Gray nodded. What's the failure rate for this course? Historically, 30%. But I'm optimistic about this cohort. Her eyes found Marcus in the back row, held him there. Some of you are here because it's the next box to check. Some of you are here because you've already seen what happens when infrastructure fails, and you're determined to do better. Both motivations work. Use what you've got. The class divided into teams after a brief introduction exercise. Marcus found himself partnered with 2 students half his age, a Pakistani-American woman named Aisha, who wanted to specialize in sustainable design, and a white kid from the suburbs named Jake, who admitted he was in engineering because his father expected it. So what's your story? Marcus pulled out his notebook, avoiding the question. Let's focus on the project. Aisha wasn't deterred. You're older than everyone else here. That means you've got real-world experience. That's valuable. I fix things, maintenance work. Jake leaned forward, interested despite his earlier apathy. What kind of things? HVAC systems, plumbing, electrical, whatever breaks. Dude, that's perfect. You know where theoretical designs fail in practice. Marcus hadn't considered his work experience as an asset, but as they began mapping out their project, a proposal for retrofitting older Chicago schools with modern ventilation systems, he realized Jake was right. He knew which systems looked good on paper but failed under real-world stress. Knew which materials claimed durability but degraded after 5 years of heavy use. Knew where contractors cut corners and how those shortcuts manifested as emergencies. The 3 hours passed faster than Marcus expected. By the time class ended, they had a rough outline and a division of labor that played to each person's strengths. Marcus would handle the practical assessment and materials analysis. Aisha would focus on environmental impact and sustainability metrics. Jake would manage the computer modeling and presentations. He left campus at 9:15 and rode the Red Line back to Brightside, where late pickup was available until 10 for families who needed it. Theo was in the quiet room, playing with Legos while Miss Jennifer supervised when Marcus arrived. Daddy, I made a robot and Miss Jennifer said it was creative. That's great, buddy. Time to go home. In the car, Marcus had finally broken down and bought a used Honda Civic with part of the Housing Stability Fund. Theo chattered about his afternoon while Marcus drove through streets slick with November rain. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, a reminder that childhood could still be joyful even in the shadow of loss. Miss Jennifer said I could bring pictures of Mama next week. They're doing a unit on family history and everyone gets to share. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You want to do that? Yeah. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. Mama would love that. They arrived home to their new apartment, a 2-bedroom in a building with actual heat and water pressure that didn't require negotiation. The move had happened 3 weeks earlier, a whirlwind of packing and cleaning, and Theo's delighted discovery that he had his own room, his own space, his own walls to decorate. Marcus had hung Sarah's unfinished quilt on the boys' wall, still unable to complete it himself, but willing to let Theo live with the evidence of his mother's love. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that Marcus had never experienced before, structure without desperation. He worked his regular shift at the Arts Center from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., picked up Theo from Brightside at 4:30, made dinner, supervised homework, and studied after Theo went to bed. Tuesday and Thursday evenings he had class, arriving home late, but energized by the intellectual challenge. Weekends he spent on coursework and Theo time, the balance imperfect but sustainable. Diana entered their lives gradually, not through grand gestures but through small consistencies. She started joining them for Sunday breakfast, arriving at Marcus's apartment with expensive coffee and the kind of pastries that Theo declared fancy with appropriate reverence. She was awkward at first, her interactions with Theo stilted by years of distance from her own daughter. But the boy's natural ease gradually melted her corporate veneer. "Miss Diana, why don't you smile with your eyes?" Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Diana froze, a croissant halfway to her mouth, her expression cycling through surprise and discomfort before landing on honesty. "I guess I forgot how." Theo considered this, 6-year-old wisdom processing adult dysfunction. "Daddy says when you forget how to do something, you practice. Like when I forgot how to tie my shoes after I stopped wearing them all summer." "Your daddy's smart." "I know. So you should practice smiling. With your eyes." Diana looked at Marcus, helpless, and he shrugged, fighting his own smile. "Kid's got a point." She tried, a conscious effort to let warmth reach her eyes, and Theo clapped with genuine delight. "Better! Now you look like a real person instead of a TV person." After breakfast, while Theo built an elaborate Lego city on the living room floor, Diana and Marcus sat at the kitchen table with their coffee, the comfortable silence of people learning to be friends. "He's remarkable. You've done an amazing job with him." "I've just tried not to screw up too badly." "That's underselling it. He's kind, curious, emotionally intelligent. Those things don't happen by accident." Marcus watched his son through the doorway, seeing Sarah in every gesture and expression. His mother had a lot to do with it. The first 3 years of his life, she was his primary influence. And the last 3 years, you've been honoring that influence. Don't diminish your role. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Diana spoke again, her voice careful. "I talked to Emily yesterday, my daughter. Told her about you and Theo."
"What did she say?" "She asked if I was trying to replace her." Marcus winced.
"That's complicated."
"It is, but also not. I told her the truth. That being around Theo reminds me of what I missed with her. That maybe if I can learn to be present for someone else's child, I can learn to be present for her again when she's ready."
"How'd she take it?"
"She said she'd think about it, which is more than I've gotten in 2 years.
Theo appeared in the doorway, holding a Lego construction. "Miss Diana, I made you an office. See? It has a desk and a chair and windows so you can see the lake." Diana took the offering with visible emotion, turning it over in her hands. "It's perfect. Thank you, Theo." "You're welcome. Now you have to smile with your eyes again." She did, and this time it looked almost natural. The semester progressed with relentless momentum. Marcus's team project evolved from rough outline to detailed proposal, a comprehensive plan for retrofitting 30 Chicago public schools with modern ventilation systems that would improve air quality while reducing energy costs. They worked in the campus library on weekends, Marcus bringing Theo sometimes when childcare fell through, the boy settling into a corner with books and drawing supplies, while the adults argued over ductwork specifications and budget projections. Professor Gray reviewed their preliminary design in mid-November, her red pen merciless across their carefully drafted plans. "Your environmental impact analysis is solid. Your budget is naive. You've underestimated material costs by at least 20%, and you haven't factored in union labor requirements. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They'd spent weeks on those numbers. How do we fix it? You call contractors, get real quotes, talk to union reps about current wage scales, stop guessing, and start researching. Aisha took the criticism hard, her perfectionism wounded. We're never going to get this done in time. Marcus surprised himself by feeling calm, the panic he'd expected replaced by determination. Yes, we will. We divide the work, make the calls, compile the data. It's just work. We know how to work. Jake looked skeptical. Dude, we have 3 weeks until presentations. Then we have 3 weeks. Let's use them. They did. Marcus spent his lunch breaks cold-calling contractors, explaining their student project and requesting rough estimates. Most hung up. A few, charmed by his honesty or bored enough to engage, provided the real-world numbers that transformed their proposal from academic exercise to viable plan. He learned about material supply chains, seasonal pricing variations, the difference between quoted costs and actual costs. He learned that his maintenance experience gave him credibility with tradespeople who might otherwise have dismissed a student inquiry. At home, he studied late into the night, reviewing building codes and energy efficiency standards while Theo slept in the next room. The quilt on the boys' wall had become a talisman, Sarah's unfinished project, a reminder that some things take longer to complete than planned. And that's okay. Diana noticed the exhaustion creeping into Marcus's face during their Sunday breakfasts. You're pushing too hard. I'm doing what's necessary. There's a difference between necessary and punishing yourself. Marcus set down his coffee, the frustration he'd been suppressing finally breaking through. You don't understand. I dropped out of this program once because I had to. If I fail now, when I have every advantage, every support, when there's no excuse except my own inadequacy, what does that say about me? It says you're human, fallible, exactly like everyone else. I don't get to be like everyone else. I'm the maintenance worker who got $50,000 from a CEO. I'm the feel-good story people tell at galas. If I fail, I'm not just disappointing myself. I'm validating every person who said I wasn't worth investing in. Diana reached across the table, stopping just short of touching his hand, respecting the boundary he'd established around physical contact. Marcus, listen to me. Franklin Williams invested in me, and I failed twice before succeeding. I failed a coding boot camp the first time through, had to repeat it, failed my first startup, lost everything, started over. He never once said I'd wasted his investment. You know what he told me? Marcus shook his head. He said failure is just practice for getting it right. The only way to waste an investment is to quit trying. The words settled into Marcus's chest, not eliminating his anxiety, but softening its edges. I'm terrified of letting you down. Then let me be clear. There is no scenario where you let me down by being human. You let me down only if you sacrifice your health or your son's well-being to meet some imaginary standard of perfection. That's not success. That's self-destruction. Theo wandered in, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Why is everybody sad at breakfast? Breakfast is supposed to be happy. Diana pulled the boy into her lap, a gesture that had become natural over the past 2 months. We're not sad, sweetheart. We're just talking about hard things. What hard things? Marcus met his son's eyes, deciding on truth. Daddy's worried about school. About doing a good job. Theo's expression became solemn, his small hands patting Diana's arms where they circled him. Mama used to say, worrying is practicing for bad things that mostly don't happen. She said it's better to practice for good things. The grief was sharp and sweet simultaneously, Sarah's wisdom delivered through their son's voice. Your mama was very smart. I know. That's why I remember what she said, so I can tell you when you forget.
Diana kissed the top of Theo's head, and Marcus saw her eyes shine with tears she was too disciplined to let fall. The final presentation arrived with the inevitability of deadlines. Marcus's team rehearsed in an empty classroom the night before, running through their slides while Professor Gray watched from the back row, her expression unreadable. Your retrofit plan is sound. Your budget is realistic. Your presentation is competent. She paused, letting the critique settle. But you're missing something. You've designed a system that works on paper. You haven't explained why it matters. Why these 30 schools? Why this specific intervention? Give me the human story, not just the technical specs. They reconvened at midnight in Marcus's apartment, Theo asleep in his room, Diana volunteering to stay with the boy while Marcus worked. Aisha spread their materials across the kitchen table, while Jake pulled up their slides on his laptop. She wants emotional narrative. That's not our strength. Marcus thought about the Arts Center, about children creating in spaces that barely functioned, about teachers improvising around failing infrastructure. What if we start with a classroom? Show what poor ventilation actually means. Kids falling asleep because CO2 levels are too high. Asthma attacks triggered by mold and poor air circulation. Teachers spending their own money on air purifiers that don't solve the underlying problem. Aisha's eyes brightened. And then we show how our system addresses each issue, not as abstract metrics, but as lived improvements. They rewrote the introduction, adding photographs of actual Chicago classrooms, quotes from teachers about infrastructure challenges. Marcus contributed details from the Arts Center struggle, the reality of working in buildings where basic environmental systems failed. By 3 a.m., they had a presentation that felt alive, rooted in real children and real consequences. The judges arrived at Harold Washington College at 9 a.m. sharp, 3 professional engineers from the city planning department, 2 men and 1 woman, all carrying clipboards and professionally skeptical expressions. 6 teams presented throughout the morning, each given 20 minutes to pitch their infrastructure projects. Marcus's team went forth, and as he stood before the judges, exhaustion and adrenaline combined into a strange clarity. He opened with a photograph of a classroom at a Southside elementary school, children slumped over desks in afternoon light. These kids aren't lazy, they're oxygen deprived. The ventilation system in this building was installed in 1963 and hasn't been meaningfully updated since. Carbon dioxide levels regularly exceed OSHA workplace safety standards. But these aren't workers who can refuse unsafe conditions. They're children who have no choice. He walked them through the proposal, Aisha handling environmental impact, Jake managing the technical animations that showed how their retrofitted system would function. Marcus focused on implementation, explaining how the design accounted for occupied buildings, minimal classroom disruption, and the reality of working within aging infrastructure. The judges asked sharp questions about cost overruns, timeline delays, union requirements. Marcus answered honestly, admitting when he didn't know, explaining how they'd built contingencies into their budget precisely because real-world implementation never matched theoretical planning. The female judge, an African-American woman in her 50s, leaned forward. You have maintenance experience. How much of this design is informed by actual building operation? Most of it. I've worked in facilities management for 7 years. I know where systems fail, where contractors cut corners, where designs that look good on paper create nightmares for the people who have to maintain them. This plan is built around practical sustainability, not just theoretical efficiency. She made a note, her expression approving. The presentations concluded at noon. Professor Gray dismissed the class, promising results by the following week. Marcus gathered his materials in exhausted silence, aware he'd done everything possible and that everything might not be enough. Diana was waiting in the hallway, Theo beside her, the boy holding a poster board covered in glitter and encouragement. We made you a good luck sign. Marcus knelt down, pulling his son into a hug. It's perfect, buddy. Thank you. Did you win? We don't know yet.
but we did our best. Theo seemed satisfied with this answer, returning his attention to Diana. Miss Diana said we could get ice cream for lunch because presentations are special occasions. Marcus looked at Diana over his son's head, seeing the question in her expression. Ice cream sounds perfect. They went to a place in Hyde Park that served elaborate sundaes with names like The Avalanche and Chocolate Chaos, Theo ordered with the confidence of someone who'd never met a dessert he didn't like, while Marcus and Diana chose simpler options, their appetites diminished by the morning's intensity. How do you think it went? Marcus dragged his spoon through melting vanilla, considering. Honestly, I think we did good work. Whether it's good enough is someone else's decision. That's growth. 3 months ago, you would have told me all the ways you failed. 3 months ago, I was convinced accepting your help was failure. And now? Now I'm just tired and grateful and still not entirely sure what I'm doing, but willing to keep doing it anyway. Theo, oblivious to adult complexity, was methodically deconstructing his sundae, eating components in careful order. Daddy, when you finish school, can we get a dog? The question came from nowhere, the way children's questions always did, launching from ice cream to life-changing decisions without transition. That's a big responsibility, buddy. I'm responsible. Miss Jennifer says so. Diana's laugh was quiet but genuine. He's got you there. Marcus looked at his son, seeing not the grieving 6-year-old he'd been protecting for 3 years, but a resilient child who'd survived loss and adapted, who was ready for new joys. Let's get through this semester first. Then we'll talk about dogs. Theo accepted this with a nod, returning to his systematic Sunday destruction, and Marcus felt something shift. The future, which had been a series of obstacles to survive, was becoming a landscape of possibilities to explore. Results arrived via email on Friday afternoon. Marcus was at the Arts Center, replacing corroded pipes in the staff bathroom, when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, but something made him stop, set down his wrench, and check the screen. The subject line was simple: capstone results. He opened the email with hands that had gone suddenly unsteady, scrolling past Professor Gray's introductory remarks to find the list of passing teams. His name appeared third, followed by Aisha's and Jake's, with a note: highest technical score. Recommended for city planning internship review. Marcus sat on the bathroom floor, surrounded by old pipes and scattered tools, and allowed himself a moment of pure relief. He'd done it. Finished what he'd started 7 years ago. Proven that interruption wasn't the same as failure. That delayed didn't mean denied. He called Diana before calling anyone else, needing to share the victory with the person who'd made it possible. I passed. We got the highest technical score. Her voice carried genuine joy. Marcus, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without the trust, without the childcare and the time and the space to actually focus. You could have. It just would have taken longer and cost more in health and sanity. This way was better. This way was possible. There's a difference. They talked for a few more minutes before Marcus returned to his pipes, but the work felt different now. Less like endless obligation and more like choice. He could finish his degree, pursue engineering opportunities, build the career he'd deferred. Or he could stay at the Arts Center, use his new certification to improve infrastructure for the community that had supported him. Both paths were valid. Both were available. That evening, he took Theo to their new favorite pizza place, a neighborhood joint that knew them by name now, where the owner always slipped Theo an extra breadstick with a conspiratorial wink. Guess what, buddy? Daddy finished his big school project. Theo's face lit up with uncomplicated pride. Does that mean you get a trophy? Better. It means I get my certification, which means I can build things, not just fix them. Like what? Like schools, or community centers, or maybe someday, things we haven't even thought of yet.
Theo considered this while chewing pepperoni with intense concentration. Can you build a place where kids can do art and also have dogs? Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him with its lightness. That's a very specific vision. I think it would be popular. You might be right. They finished dinner and walked home through December streets decorated for holidays that were approaching with unexpected gentleness. The first year after Sarah's death, Christmas had been an endurance test. The second year, slightly less painful. This year felt different. Not free of grief, but no longer consumed by it. There was room now for anticipation alongside loss. Diana called the following Sunday with an unexpected proposal. I'm having dinner with Emily next week. She's flying in for the holidays, and she asked if she could meet you and Theo. Marcus heard the nervousness beneath her casual tone. You want us there? Only if you're comfortable. I know it's asking a lot, subjecting you to family dynamics. But Emily said seeing me with Theo made her curious about what I'm like with children. Apparently, I used to be good at it. You're getting good at it again. Practice helps. Theo's an excellent teacher. They agreed to dinner at Diana's condo, a space Marcus had never seen but imagined as all modern lines and expensive minimalism. The reality, when he and Theo arrived the following Thursday, was surprisingly warm. Large windows overlooked Lake Michigan, but the furniture was comfortable rather than showpiece, and photographs covered one entire wall, capturing a young Diana with a dark-haired girl at various ages. Emily was 20, studying environmental science at Berkeley with her mother's sharp intelligence and her own distinct gentleness. She shook Marcus's hand with firm confidence, then knelt to Theo's level. Your dad tells me you're an artist. Theo nodded seriously. I draw and build, and sometimes I use glitter even though it gets everywhere. Glitter is the best. My mom used to hate when I used it because she'd find sparkles in weird places for weeks. Diana made a show of checking her sweater. Still finding sparkles. Some things never change. They ate dinner at Diana's kitchen table, a meal she'd clearly stressed over, the kind of elaborate cooking that came from recipes rather than instinct. But the food was good, and more importantly, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. Emily asked Theo about school and art and what he wanted for Christmas, treating him like a person rather than a prop. She asked Marcus about his certification with genuine interest, her questions revealing she'd actually listened when Diana described his journey. After dinner, while Theo was absorbed in a nature documentary Diana had queued up specifically for this purpose, Emily and Marcus found themselves alone on the balcony, the December wind sharp off the lake. Thank you for being patient with her. With my mom. Marcus leaned against the railing, watching lights reflect off dark water. She's been incredibly generous. I'm the one who should be thanking her. It's more than the money. You gave her something to invest in that isn't just capital and returns. She needed that. I couldn't be that for her, and I felt guilty about it for years. You don't owe her access to your life just because she's your mother. Emily's smile was sad and knowing. No, but I want to give it anyway. Seeing her with Theo, seeing how she's learning to be present instead of just productive, it makes me think maybe we could try again. Build something different than what we had before. That's generous of you. It's self-interested. I miss having a mom. I just needed her to remember how to be one. They returned inside to find Diana and Theo engaged in serious discussion about whether penguins were better than polar bears, an argument that had no winner, but maximum passion. Marcus watched his son defend penguins with elaborate reasoning, watched Diana counter with polar bear facts delivered with mock solemnity, and felt something settle in his chest. This wasn't family, not in the traditional sense, but it was connection, and connection was what had been missing from their lives since Sarah died. The week before Christmas, Marcus received an email from the city planning department. The judges from his capstone presentation were offering a paid summer internship, a 3-month position that would involve working on actual school infrastructure projects. The pay was modest but real,
and the experience would be invaluable. He called Professor Gray to confirm it wasn't a mistake. It's not a mistake. Your presentation impressed them. Practical experience combined with fresh certification makes you valuable. I already have a job. Talk to Patricia. See if she can give you a leave of arrangement. This opportunity could change your career trajectory. Patricia, when he approached her, was immediately supportive. Of course you should take it. We'll manage for 3 months. And Marcus, you'll come back with skills we need. Win-win. The pieces were falling into place with momentum that felt both exciting and terrifying. Marcus had spent 3 years in survival mode, where success meant making it through another day. Now success was expanding, becoming something larger and more complex, and he wasn't entirely sure he trusted it. Christmas arrived, with its complicated mix of joy and absence. Marcus and Theo decorated their apartment, hanging stockings and setting up a small tree that Theo adorned with enthusiastic disregard for aesthetics. They made cookies using Sarah's recipes, and Marcus told stories about past Christmases, keeping her memory alive without letting it dominate their present. Diana invited them to Christmas dinner, along with Emily and Grace Williams, Franklin's widow. The gathering was small and imperfect, strangers bound together by loss and hope, and the belief that families could be chosen as well as inherited. Grace raised her glass after dinner, her voice carrying the weight of 7 decades of wisdom. Franklin used to say that kindness isn't a transaction. It's a transmission. Energy that passes from person to person, changing form, but never disappearing. He transmitted kindness to Diana. Diana transmitted it to Marcus. And I see Marcus already transmitting it forward, to his son, to his work, to everyone he touches. She looked at Theo, who was half asleep against Marcus's shoulder. That boy is growing up in a world where kindness is modeled as strength, not weakness. That's Franklin's legacy. That's all our legacies. Later, after Theo was asleep in Diana's guest room and Emily had retired to her own space, Marcus and Diana stood on the balcony again, watching the city lights blur through light snow. I've been thinking about the internship, about what comes after. Diana waited, patient. I could pursue engineering full-time, make real money, build a career, give Theo everything he deserves. But the art center matters. The families there matter. And I'm good at what I do. Not just the technical work, but understanding what communities need. I don't want to abandon that. Who says you have to choose? Work the internship, gain experience, then decide how to apply it. Maybe you end up designing infrastructure for nonprofits. Maybe you consult part-time while staying hands-on at the center. Maybe you invent a role that doesn't exist yet. Marcus turned to face her, this woman who'd upended his life with uninvited generosity. Why did you really do this? And don't say it was about Franklin. Diana's expression was unguarded in the darkness, vulnerable in ways she never allowed under fluorescent lights. Because I've spent 20 years building companies and accumulating wealth, and I woke up one day realizing I had nothing that actually mattered. No genuine connections, no purpose beyond profit. I watched you work at 2 a.m. with the kind of dedication I thought I'd invented, and I realized you had something I'd lost. You still believed your work meant something. You still cared. Her voice wavered slightly. I didn't invest in you to fix you. I invested in you to remind myself what it looks like when someone values integrity over advancement. You gave me something too, Marcus. You gave me purpose. The snow fell harder, muffling the city sounds, creating a pocket of quiet in the middle of urban chaos. So where does this go? This friendship or partnership or whatever we're building? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Marcus nodded, accepting the uncertainty, and they stood together in comfortable silence while snow transformed Chicago into something clean and new. January brought the spring semester's beginning, and the internships approaching reality. Marcus enrolled in 2 additional courses, pushing toward his full degree now, momentum carrying him forward. Theo thrived at Brightside, his artwork covering every available surface in their apartment, evidence of creativity unleashed. And on a Tuesday afternoon in late January, Marcus stood in the Art Center's basement, supervising a new project. With Diana's general fund donation, Patricia had approved a complete ventilation system upgrade, and Marcus had volunteered to oversee the installation, applying everything he'd learned in his capstone project. The contractor, a grizzled white man in his 60s who'd spent 40 years in Chicago construction, reviewed Marcus's plans with grudging respect. "You designed this yourself?" "With a team, but yeah, mostly. It's good work, efficient, practical." "You do this for a living?" "Not yet, but maybe someday." The man handed back the blueprints. "You ever want a job, call me. People who understand theory and practice are rare." Marcus took the business card, adding it to a small collection of opportunities that had accumulated over the past 4 months. His life was expanding in ways he'd never imagined possible, and the vertigo of change was gradually being replaced by something steadier. Not confidence, not yet, but possibility. That evening, he and Theo worked together on a project that had been waiting 3 years. The quilt Sarah had started for Marcus's birthday, left unfinished in the closet, was finally coming out into the light. Marcus spread the fabric pieces across their kitchen table while Theo studied them with an artist's eye. "We could finish it for Mama." "We could. Would you like that?" "Yeah. Then she's still part of our house, still making things with us." They worked slowly, Marcus's maintenance-calloused hands surprisingly gentle with needle and thread, Theo directing color placement with absolute certainty. They didn't finish in one night or 1 week, but they made progress, and progress was enough. On a Sunday morning in early February, exactly 1 year after the gala that changed everything, Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through his bedroom window and Theo jumping on his bed with an energy that should be illegal before 8 a.m. "Daddy, wake up! Miss Diana is here and she brought fancy breakfast." Marcus pulled on sweatpants and shuffled to the kitchen, where Diana was indeed setting out pastries and coffee with the efficiency of someone who'd learned their way around his space. "Special occasion?" "1-year anniversary of the best investment I ever made." Marcus poured coffee, noting that she'd learned exactly how he took it. "That's a pretty dramatic claim for someone worth $200 million. Financial returns are easy. Human returns are rare. You and Theo gave me more than I gave you." Theo, mouthful of chocolate croissant, looked up with interest. "What did we give you?" Diana knelt beside him, her smile reaching her eyes in a way that had become natural over months of practice. "You taught me how to be human again, how to care about something more than quarterly earnings, how to smile with my eyes." Theo nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense, and returned to his pastry destruction. Later, after breakfast, and after Diana had left with promises to return for dinner, Marcus and Theo sat together on their couch, the Sunday paper spread around them in comfortable chaos. "Daddy, are we still sad about Mama?" The question was delivered with childlike directness, without warning or preamble. "I'll always miss her. But it's a different kind of sad now. Not the kind that makes everything hurt. More like the kind that reminds me how lucky I was to have her. I think she'd like Miss Diana." "Yeah, buddy, I think so too." "And she'd be proud of you for finishing school and helping people and being brave." Marcus pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of chocolate and childhood. "She'd be most proud of you. You're exactly who she hoped you'd be." They sat together while morning turned to afternoon, and Marcus thought about the year that had passed. The terror of exposure, the humiliation of public need, the slow acceptance of help, the gradual rebuilding of a life that was more than just survival. He thought about Diana learning to connect, about Emily rebuilding relationship with her mother, about Grace Williams carrying her husband's legacy forward through strangers who'd become family. He thought about this summer internship starting in 4 months, about the engineering degree he'd complete next year, about the career possibilities expanding like horizons after fog lifts. But mostly, he thought about this moment, this apartment, this boy who was his reason for everything. The quilt they'd been working on lay folded on the armchair, nearly complete now. Sarah's vision realized through collaborative effort. It would go on Theo's bed when finished, a covering woven from past love and present dedication. Proof that interrupted didn't mean abandoned, that some stories took years to reach their proper conclusions. Marcus checked his watch, an old habit that no longer carried its usual anxiety. 3:15. They had time before dinner, time to finish the Sunday crossword, time to build the Lego set Diana had brought, time to simply exist without urgency or crisis. Time, Marcus realized, was the greatest gift he'd received. Not the money, though that mattered. Not the opportunities, though those were transforming his future. But time, the space to breathe and think and choose. The luxury of hours that weren't consumed by survival calculations. He looked at Theo, at their apartment full of light and possibility, and felt something close to peace. The journey wasn't finished. Challenge would come, uncertainties would persist, grief would revisit in unexpected moments. But he wasn't walking alone anymore, wasn't carrying everything himself. And that difference, that fundamental shift from isolation to connection, had changed everything. Sarah's voice echoed in memory, words she'd spoken years ago that he'd finally learned to understand. Strength isn't carrying everything alone. It's knowing when to share the weight. Marcus had learned, and in learning, he'd discovered that accepting help didn't diminish his strength. It revealed it.